Have you heard the words framing or reframing used at work or in leadership videos or somewhere else and wondered what they mean? If so, then this video is for you. Or if you think you already know what they mean, but you want to know how to use them, then this video is also for you. And honestly, if you're just here because you're bored and you wanted something to watch, then, well, welcome. Hey, how's it going? This is Scruffy Leadership, a YouTube channel about management and leadership. My name's Ben, and I've been a leader and a manager in the tech industry for over 25 years. Okay, so reframing. First of all, what is it? It's actually really very simple. If you reframe something, you look at it or you describe it from a different perspective. So it can take two forms. It can be internal to you, choosing to think of something differently, or it can be external, presenting something to others in a new way. In both cases, I guess the reason it's called reframing is because it's like taking the same picture but putting it in a different frame. It makes a lot of difference. Imagine a painting with a really scruffy old plastic frame, or then the same painting in a beautiful mahogany frame. Or maybe think of the difference between these two views of the sky. So reframing is putting a new frame on something, looking at it from a different perspective or with a different mindset. The most obvious example of reframing is taking something that seems bad and looking at it through a more positive lens. Oh no, it's a disaster, Sally's quit! Okay, well then we can reframe that as, okay, but that means we can hire someone new, bring some new skills into the team. Now, please remember, this is not about pretending that things are fine. It's about finding an honest way of looking at something differently that is helpful. And if you do this well, it can help improve the team's morale or even your own morale. Again, it's not about lying to yourself or your team, but it's about looking on the bright side, seeing the positives where there are positives rather than focusing on the negatives and getting down about them. Now, this approach, by the way, can be really helpful when you're finding things stressful at work. A second way that reframing can be helpful is in problem solving. I'd be willing to bet you've experienced this at least once in your career. A group of you are in a room trying to solve some tricky problem and you're getting nowhere. And suddenly out of the blue, someone suggests something new. Hey, why don't we think of it this way instead? And just with that small intervention, suddenly you see a way forward. A more general version of this form of reframing is about challenging your assumptions. Quite often when you find yourself stuck with something, it's because you're making an assumption that isn't quite right. Maybe you can relax a constraint, or maybe something's changed, or maybe actually you just lack some information. In each case, a reframing can help to find a way forward. A third form of reframing is kind of an amalgamation of the first two. It applies when you have someone in your team that's showing some undesirable behavior, or it could even be your manager, for example. Rather than thinking, how can I get them to stop doing that? You think, why are they doing that? What is causing it? It's a small reframe, but it can make a big difference because it forces you to think about the root cause, forces you to think about it from their perspective rather than just trying to address the symptoms. In some cases, by the way, the outcome of this might be to realize that the behavior is not really undesirable at all. It might be irritating for some people or for you, but maybe once you've figured out why the behavior is happening, you'll realize that actually it's a good thing overall. I'm not saying that'll always happen, but it will sometimes. A third form of reframing is to reduce the emotion in situations. So for example, your boss sends you an email full of demands and exclamation marks, and your reaction might be one of fear or anger or perhaps a bit of both. But it might be healthier for you if you reframe it. Your boss is stressed and worried about something, so what can you do to reassure them? Finally, as well as using reframing yourself, you can also use reframing as part of coaching the people you manage. So if someone comes to you with a problem or something they're unhappy about, get them to consider whether there's a different frame they could use for looking at it. Now, be careful not to be dismissive or patronizing. They probably have a valid concern, and it's certainly valid that they feel the way they do. So you're not trying to deny that, but you are trying to help them find a new way to look at things, a new frame. You can do this by asking questions that start with phrases like, have you thought about, or do you think it's possible that, but actually better than those in general is to prompt them to come up with the alternatives themselves. So you might say, are there any other ways you could look at this? You could even actually explain the idea of framing and reframing to them so they understand what you're trying to achieve. Now, notice that I've said framing and reframing. Reframing is the act of changing the frame on something, but framing itself is also a really important thing in its own right. For example, when you start a meeting, you should start by providing a frame. This likely involves explaining what happened before the meeting and why that led to the need for this meeting, or it might involve explaining what you want from the meeting. But it can also include things like behaviors you want to see or not see in the meeting, or your expectations for what will happen after the meeting. And this is framing. You're providing a frame for the meeting, which is really just a way of making sure that everyone knows why they're there and what to expect and what to do. You can do this beforehand in an email or in the calendar invitation, question, or you can do it at the start of the meeting, but ideally every meeting should have an explicit frame that everyone present understands. Okay, so that's framing and reframing. Next time you find yourself in a tricky situation at work, facing a problem yourself or helping someone else, consider whether there's a way to reframe things. It's not guaranteed to help, but it often does. The video that's on screen now, by the way, is about a really good example of bad framing that I suspect almost all leaders are guilty of at some point. Probably you. Check it out to find out how to avoid it. And if you have thoughts or questions about reframing, why not share them in the comments below? And the same goes if you have any ideas for subjects you'd like to see me cover in future videos. Bye. See you soon.